One of my favorite podcast guests of all time is Tom Scarice. Now in his third year as Westport's Superintendent of Schools, he's led the district through COVID into a new era with an emphasis on social and emotional learning, and soon through the renovation of a couple of elementary schools.
Yeah.
I always learn something from Tom, which I guess should happen when I'm talking to an educator. So, Tom, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Dan. I always love being here.
It's great. So, you've developed a really strong focus on school climate and culture. There's been a survey of students, faculty, and parents last year. So, what exactly is school climate and culture?
Sure. Well, climate and culture are distinguished a little bit differently in the literature. Culture is kind of an overall of kind of the way we do things around here. Climate is a little bit of, for lack of better words, a little how we feel right now. But they do go hand in hand. They are used interchangeably at times. However, there's a distinction there. The state mandates that school districts, and really this is all an offshoot of a horrific student suicide from probably about 10 years ago in Meriden, where I believe it was Meriden, where the student was found at the root cause of the student's taking of his own life had to do with pervasive bullying. After that, we started to get legislation around bullying. And like most legislation, policy is a very blunt instrument, as I always say. We have to be more surgical at the local level. Policy is a blunt instrument. So that first policy came out with all of its imperfections, like a blunt instrument would do. And along the way through multiple iterations, rather than just focusing on the victim and the perpetrator, it did iterate to a point where we looked at, well, what does the impact of culture and climate have on these types of cases and in general, on schools, which really is a great thing. So that then turned into a mandated biennial climate survey. So every school district in Connecticut is required to administer a climate survey now. There is a state survey that we have done in Westport, and with a couple of my colleagues in district, we nudged the team to look at some different tools. Probably tools that might be a little more revealing, and not just so much that we're checking a box to say we did the survey. And it was a little bit of a calculated risk on the heels of 2 years of a pandemic. You're administering a climate and culture survey. How do we feel right now? Exhausted. And we did it late in the year on top of it, which, that's a lesson learned as well. The first week of June is not the best time to do that. But it certainly was a survey where we had to look at areas that probably weren't probed before in that manner. And it gave us, some pretty raw feedback. It affirmed some areas of our work, and then some areas it shined a light on that needed to be. So,
for example,
student engagement, sense of belonging, teacher-student relationships, just a number of areas of big ideas that are, say, a series of 8 to 10 questions would probe into. And it got us really reconsidering our practices in those areas. And again, when you're thinking of the year or two prior, you're thinking of students in and out for a time period of half time because of hybrids. You're thinking of how do you develop belonging and engagement in relationships when we're creating these little bubbles around ourselves during COVID in school, and you can't be any closer than you and I are right now. We had cohorts at recess that couldn't mix. You couldn't play too closely. So, I tried to, and share this with the team that in light of all of that, okay, keep that context when you look at this data. That said, I believe in, kind of confronting the hard truths even when they're painful, and let's create some action plans around that. So that's kind of where we got to now. What I did share with the leadership team is, from a point of consistency, I pulled out the cover letter that I sent when I applied here in February of 2020. And tattered all through that is my belief system around the importance of fostering a very powerful and strong school culture and school climate. it's just a part of my fabric of the way I believe that I will lead successfully, is through culture and through climate. And it's through a productive work around that, so.
And it comes at a time when obviously there's so much focus on academic achievement. Where does school climate fit in with the greater emphasis on academics, STEM, reading, writing?
Yeah.
Are they separate? Are they inextricably wound together?
Well, whenever someone asks me, about the relative importance of these types of topics, I always kind of tongue-in-cheek suggest, go try to teach a kid that's not engaged. Go try to teach a kid that doesn't trust you, doesn't connect with you. Now go teach a kid who will run through a wall for you, and you tell me how much difference the learning will be as a result. And I've seen that in all the demographics that I've worked in. I've worked in urban settings with at-risk kids. I've worked in affluent settings. I've worked in settings that are, demographically in the middle of the road. And to me, that's an absolute truth. And I think, whether you're talking about performance in the arts, whether you're talking about athletics, whether you're talking about the classroom, I just think it's human nature. And I see it with parenting as well in my own house. If my children feel that, I'm just kind of shuffling them along versus I'm actually engaging, I think it is a part of just human dynamics that, if it's done by design and intentionally, is ethical, but also leads to a much higher level of performance across the board.
So how do you implement what you've learned? Is it, we're going to do it this way? Do you bring in consultants?
Yeah.
What's the buy-in? And
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
It's a little bit of all. I don't think a complex topic like that warrants a very thoughtful and comprehensive approach. So I probably 12 or so years ago really began to dig into a systems thinking perspective, capital S, and really having an appreciation for how a system functions. So if you want to think of a very simple metaphor, think of a car. When you impact one part of a car, the steering wheel, okay, take it out. Okay, it's not going to function. Okay, you take one tire off, it's not going to function. The interdependency of a car, human body. Okay, take one of your systems offline, cardiovascular. Your sight. Your one of your senses. You're not going to function optimally. You're all interdependent. So I look at a school and a set of schools being a district all the same way. So how do we approach it from a systems perspective? And from my perspective on that, let's look at what problem we're trying to solve here. So we looked at our data. We looked at around culture and climate, the areas that really jumped off the pages for us of areas we want to address. And some of it was in open-ended comments, not just how people responded to the survey. Most of it was in actually the survey data, but it's a through line now through the entire system, starting with a general focus up top, all the way through school improvement plans for each individual school that focus on one area for students, one area for teachers, one area for faculty, and then that through line goes down to the principals, and the principals have taken ownership and said, these are my goals for the year. These are the school goals for the year. These feed up to the district goals also around these topics. So this is not part of a specific tech plan, strategic plan, equity action study plan. It is the foundation for all the work we do. It really foundational.
Can you measure it?
Yeah, I get asked that question so often on measurement. I have a very interesting relationship with measurement because when I think of the most important things in life, I can't count them. When I think of, and it's hard in a modern world that cherishes measurement.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think as long as we can find a comfort level that there's a consensus around qualitative and quantitative measurement, I can live with that. I've seen the worst of schools when measurement becomes the focus. And how does that happen? That happens when we become the educational equivalent of Enron. We increase the bottom line at the expense of kids. I've been a part of that. I led that. It's the dirtiest moment of my career. As a middle school principal, I was challenged as a school of choice, a magnet school, to raise test scores X amount of percent. I brought kids in on Saturdays to teach them how to take the test. I mean, I did bad things and my test scores went up and I was celebrated,
Yeah.
and I had to quit. I can't do this anymore. I had a conversation with my superintendent. I can't do this anymore. I feel like the movie in my mind when I got into the field became a nightmare. This is not why I got in this field. So I have that aversion of just being careful. I do think measurement's critically important for this reason. You can't continuously improve without having feedback on where you are and the progress you made, and if you're making progress or not. So the devil's in the details for me. So how do you measure? We're going to administer surveys every other year, and I'm 100% confident we're going to see some significant growth because of the efforts we're taking. I have no doubt in my mind about that. Measuring the impact on student learning from that is really tricky. You know, who do you love most in your life? Measure it. How do you do that?
Yeah.
How do I measure how much I love my kids? How often I tell them I love them? How many times I sacrifice for them? You know, so it's tricky, and I don't think that it's something that has to be adversarial. I think minds have to come together and come up with a system, and I'm happy to do this work, to lead that work around what's appropriate measurement. I'll end by this point. I do think the best place to look for advice on measurement is in the nonprofit community, because their work is missionary. So how do you measure success? The American Heart Association, you know, the Make-A-Wish Foundation. How do you measure their success? You know, so I think schools are not 100%, but somewhat in that realm of being more missionary based. Yeah. And I've reached out to some of those, speaking of consultants that work with that world to say, how does Make-A-Wish increase their donations? They have to tell a narrative story, maybe even quantitative, to get donations. So how do they do that? And that's kind of where my mind goes.
Fascinating. So let me segue here to something that we can measure, and that's kids in the classrooms.
Yes.
COVID, you know, I think every person in Manhattan or Brooklyn moved to Westport during
Feels
COVID,
like it. Yes.
and they all have kids.
Yes.
And they're all in our schools.
Yeah.
Is that good? What does it do to our schools? What does it do to our budget?
Well, it does a lot of things. I mean, the first question, is that good? I would say right off the gates, for the Westport community, it is incredibly flattering that so many people chose this community. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, I'm in 2.5 years here now. I know exactly why. There's a good reason why. What I think of a family from the outside looking in, it is a tremendous community to move into. There's so much to offer. There's proximity. I mean, you make the list. You've been here for your whole life. You know that. The problems that it creates for a system, I guess they're good problems to have. You know, we have a vibrant community. We have more kids moving into the community. And I'm going to date myself. It's a little bit like the movie from the 80s, The Gremlins. Like, you get them wet and they multiply. You know, that's what it feels like. I mean, it's just August. We just get the tsunami for the past 3 years in August of kids that start to sign up and show up. And I'm guilty as a parent. And my wife and I, we were always like, oh, crap, we didn't register our kids. It's August, and we're educators, okay?
The cobbler with his shoes.
Yeah, yes, exactly. So it has, don't quote me on these numbers. I'll do my best here. I think we budgeted 3 years ago for 108 elementary sections, and I think we're projecting upwards of 125 maybe.
Wow.
I think so, something in that range. It's that dramatic.
Yeah.
So when you talk about budgets, that's an exponential growth. So we're already, like, there was an enrollment decline everywhere across the nation, okay? The Great Recession led to a big decrease in birth rates, and probably some other cultural factors why less kids were being born. We all were experiencing. My prior district, I actually redistricted and closed a school. That's how many kids we were shedding. Here, we were going through the same thing in Westport. That's not only leveled off and we bent that curve back, it is going to, if it continues, the elementaries are already back to where we were before they had their enrollment decline. They're already there. So that is the challenge. And when you're looking at a year-over-year budget, now you're really in a problematic situation, because we have short-term memory with operational budgets for municipalities. You know, where are you this year compared to last year? Okay. Well, look at the impact over 3 years, 15, 17 additional sections, whatever. It's tremendous growth. Positive. I think it's very positive for the community. I think most people would agree that's a positive thing.
I know there's a lot of talk about all the new apartments being built,
Yeah.
and people worry about kids. I think a lot of those are 1 and 2 bedroom apartments.
Likely, yeah.
Probably
Yeah.
won't have a lot of kids.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we do have enough room for them.
We're making room.
Okay.
We're public schools. We'll wait. We'll welcome them in.
Yeah.
So right now, I think what we have to consider is we just came off of a 2-year period of just incredible chaos. I mean, we managed it well, but it was forced on us to be in a response mode for 2+ years. With fear and anxiety and physical health at stake. So I am a big believer in, no unforced errors around chaos, deliberate, slow, the best way that we can approach things. If we have to make a change once. We're going to have to look at the Board of Ed, and I strongly recommend building a brand new Long Lots Elementary School. We've talked about that here actually before. That's an inflection point. It's ideal if you're going to make changes in a district from a student makeup, who goes to what school, redistricting. You do it once, you do it at an inflection point. That's ideal. Whether the cards will be forced on us in a different way, I don't have a crystal ball. But I do know at this point in time, as we conduct some analysis right now of space utilization and so forth, it really is best for kids, families, and the community if we move deliberately and make one very deliberate move.
So what's the timetable for that?
Well, we set out a goal and an objective and a timeline that Long Lots would open up with a brand new building in September of 2026. So that gives us time to go through our funding approval process this year. It gives us time for planning and designing and engineering next year, and about a 20-month construction period with a little time to spare. So that's ideal. And concurrently, we would run a path of looking at what space do we have in our 5 elementary schools to look at if we are going to be shifting. And this is not a new topic to Westport. Redistricting has been talked about a number of times well before I got here. That we would do that concurrently and analyze that. It's with the growth over the past couple of years, it does create increased pressure, and I respect those who are impatient and want to make a move sooner. My only fear is without a definitive answer right now on Long Lots, that's a tricky thing to do. And I'm very averse to creating chaos if it can be slightly avoided or delayed.
Yeah. I had not thought of COVID as chaos, but it's the right word. I mean, it was a tsunami.
Yeah.
So what, as an educator, as you look back on the past 2.5 years, and the tide of COVID is receding, even though it's not gone.
Yeah.
What effects do you see on students, on staff, on education that are sort of either long range or maybe even permanent?
Yeah. I think we talked about this at the outset of COVID, during COVID, and the very, very tail end of the defensive posture of COVID, masks and distancing and all that. And we kind of projected. I think we're finding out additional little things along the way that impacted probably more in the well-being psychology side of things. I think that has had a residual effect, which the focus on connectedness and belonging and relationships is so important for us as a result of that. The changes this year that we made very definitively in our schools to kick the year off with students and faculty and continue to do that are reflective of that.
For example?
Well, the schools have all doing their own little individual programs that are just injecting life again back into the schools, fun activities, for the sake of fun, So those are the kinds of things that all got put on the shelf because we couldn't mix, we couldn't do things. So bringing kids together in like a pep rally feel, whatever the event is certainly, one element of that, and now creating times for connectedness. So the high school has their connections period, the middle schools have their kind of advisory periods. Really finding deliberate ways for small groups of people to connect with an adult. So those are all, well underway and will continue. I think that the academic side of it it's interesting because there's a theory that it probably impacted the most at-risk kids nationally and probably locally as well, more so. It widened gaps. I mean, nationally, that seems to be the case. Locally, there's definitely pockets. And I think that we had a bit of a false start in September of 21 when we came back and we're like, okay, we're normal. Oh, here comes Omicron, And I think even this September, coming back into schools, I've gotten some feedback that, teachers are receiving their students in September, Mr. Scarice, and they're receiving them like in September of 2019, but they're not quite the same kids. And then when you complicate things by looking at the middle school level that are in high school now and knowing they were combined. So we're focused on a little bit of an analysis at that freshman, sophomore level of those cohorts as well, and maybe pressing a little bit of reset where we need to for those kids, just because of the impact there. But I think by and large, the academics, I have a lot of faith that we'll close any gaps and we'll be good there. What I am concerned about are just those residual psychological, pieces. Yeah. I said this to a colleague of mine. Before the pandemic, we knew about the little dopamine machines in their hands, right? They were getting hits on their phones and getting hits on their tablets and everything else. That usage only increased over the pandemic. And I really, I do think that it's a real thing. And we saw our first lawsuit towards a video game producer over the weekend. I think it was up in Canada, where parents, class action sued, suing, I think, the makers of Fortnite. And don't quote me on the details here, but because they created a game that was meant to be addictive.
Wow.
And our kids are growing up in that. And then in the middle of that, there was a 2-year period where they were relegated to small groups of kids and their devices.
Had to look at their screens.
Yeah, everything. Yeah. So I think every generation has a cross to bear. Every generation has something that distinguishes it from others. I don't think any generation has had the type of technology at the fingertips of kids that could be truly destructive. Mm-hmm. It could be. When you think of what social media has done to adults and kids, by the way, not just kids. And I point back to my theory on this one, for what it's worth. The moment we monetized social media, sometime in the early 2000s, it was an inflection point. That's when things changed, because now we were out there to make money to get you addicted to that device. Wow. So my theory, for what it's worth. For what it's worth.
It's a good one. How about operationally during COVID? Is there anything, buses, cafeteria, delivery, where you said, wow, this is great, we're going to keep doing this?
Yeah, well,
what a surprise.
We collapsed a lot of buses.
Yeah.
I mean, that was one thing we had to do because of the driver shortage there. I think we were all craving to get back to our socializing and lunch. And, middle school, I love what they did. They kept the outdoors, even, this time of the year. Sure, go outside, really? Whatever. They got the furniture out there. Kids are coming and going. And what it did is it did thin out the herd in the CAF, but it lent itself to some, especially all through the fall, some really comfortable socializing for middle school kids. Which the cafeteria can be a stressful place, for middle school kids. Some of those practices did stick. We did do just an incredibly impressive transportation study that really pointed to some different opportunities for us to consider. And we put it all on the table. I think the one that got the most attention was revisiting the start times, because the consultants from First Student that came in, it was all public, the presentation, they recommended that we look at a longer stretch between our bus tiers, another 15 minutes. And I know as a parent that had relied on transportation for years, my kid's a little older now, the precision of minutes in the morning is high stakes.
Yeah.
Like, that bus is coming at 7:47. I need it there at 7:47 because I have to be in my car at 7:49 so I can get to work at, fill it in. So I definitely think that there's work to be done there. I mean, the bus driver shortage has probably been the singular biggest impact on operations for us in the district. I mean, I can't think of one that even compares that has impacted students, parents, and faculty as much as the bus driver shortage.
And the whole town.
The whole town. When you come in late in the morning as a little one, your whole day can be upside down. It's like you feel behind the morning meeting, you feel behind, you feel like you were stressed, it's just so unfair for kids. So I don't think I've ever in my 11 years superintendent felt more frustrated at an operational issue than transportation this year. And there is a reality to shortages around bus drivers. Now, I'm very excited about where we're headed because the study pointed to a series of recommendations. We have an RFP out there looking for the best vendor who can meet our needs. And I think next year we'll be in a completely different position. That said, we have kids right now that we're much, much better now. But we extended probably 8, 9, 10 weeks of busing stressors, where 2 weeks is normal, right? You get those pictures the first couple of days, you're late because of that, and all. Now you're in the third week of October, and there's kids walking in 9 o'clock. You're on the floor with your teacher, and the kids are walking in 9:07, 9:08, and everyone's looking at them. It's just totally unacceptable. So,
well, if you can solve that, every driver in Westport will sing your praises. So speaking of Westport, you've been here now 2.5 years. You came in the beginning of COVID, and you knew Westport a little bit. You had worked in Weston.
I did, yeah.
What's your impression of the town overall? Any surprises?
No, I mean, as I said, I've been across so many different demographics. The one thing that I'm a firm believer of is people are people. We all have very consistent needs, for belonging. We all have needs for, kind of predictability. We all have certain needs that, in my position, are really important. Communication, prior notice, all those things. That doesn't surprise me at all. I think that I was warned. No, I know I was warned of, it's going to be hard in this demographic and this, that, and the other. I have had very, very little issue with, people asserting their opinions or you should, you that. I think that's a little mythical. I think that it just comes with the turf. You figure Fairfield County. I've found people quite lovely. I get a lot of thank you messages after things happen. And I certainly get when we drop the ball, I expect to get, a message or a comment about you dropped the ball. I have no problem with that. I am a high achiever. I'm a pretty driven type A guy. So I always find myself in that element I fit in. But I do know that this is a community that just cherishes its kids and the programs that support its kids. And we talked before we started here about, the performance, the Guys and Dolls performance. I mean, all the way down to the little ones' performances, the athletics, the high school, all the way down to the little ones. Academics, same thing. There's such a cherished sense of child development here, which, for me, that fits exactly where I am professionally, where I've been for years. I think the pressure piece that our kids feel, I can't compare it, Dan, to a generation ago, but it is real. And it is detrimental. And I think folks know it, and we're kind of caught up in it. And when I say we, I don't think it's just Westport we. I think it's kind of all around. I forgot Roosevelt. I don't know. One of the old presidents had a quote that I loved. I wrote it on my board in my office. Comparison is the thief of all joy. And we're raising our kids in a comparison era. I mean, everything is about comparing. It's like the Facebook page, the parents put up, or the social media post from the kid, and
the college decal on the back of the car.
All of that. You fill in the blank on all of those different pieces, and it's just part of the world we're in right now. I reject that. I don't think it's healthy. That part I don't think is specific to Westport.
So, and you've got a lot going on. You visit all the schools. You got a long commute. Do you ever get a chance to go around Westport in a non-educational way? And if so, what's your go-to spot?
I will tell you, My wife and I spent a Saturday here about a month ago because I took a walk from my office to the Saugatuck Church. We do meetings in the basement once a month at 3, 4 o'clock with the leadership team. Reverend Patton's there, and we use the space there. And it was a beautiful early October day, so rather than drive over, I walked over. And I stopped and I saw on the right-hand side as I'm walking up, I saw this little lumber store, New England Lumber or whatever. I thought, my wife and I for years have been wanting to have like a reclaimed wood mantle for our fireplace. We have no mantle and it drives us crazy. So I was like, let me walk in there. I wandered in there. I talked to the guy, fell in love with everything I saw. So a week later, Carrie and I spent the day here.
Wow.
Yeah, totally incognito. I mean, I had a New York Rangers baseball hat on, long sleeve tee, jeans. You wouldn't recognize me. No tie, probably a little bit of scruff. We walked around town and we went there obviously for an appointment. And then we took advantage of one of those October had beautiful weekends. We walked up the river. We went to a couple shops here, at lunch and everything, and then went back and watched my boys play hockey. And that was probably the first time that I soaked it up. In that way, and it was just lovely. And of course, the way back, why don't we do this more often? It was one of those. So,
Oh, that's great.
yeah.
So last question, and this is fantastic. We're taping this a couple of weeks before Christmas. Santa Claus comes and visits the Westport Public School District. What does Santa give?
Oh my goodness, what does Santa give? That is a great question. I hope it's a big, big bag. I think what will be helpful for the entire district is a little bit more understanding around where the district is facing headwinds financially right now. And not in dire straits, but as a result of what we're faced with enrollment is, a good measure of understanding around there and maybe a little bit of goodwill when it comes time to consider where we are financially in our budget and in our capital needs. So I think that will be helpful. I think we have a great team, so I'm not going to ask for more of this or that or the other. I think we're in really good shape with our administrators, with our teachers. A little recognition, more recognition for some of those individuals I think will be great too, that are doing the good work behind the scenes. So, yeah.
Good. Well, it's a good ask for Santa, and
that was a tough one for us.
he and his elves can get working on it. Tom Scarice, Superintendent of Schools for the Westport Public Schools. Thanks for being guest this week on 06880, the podcast.
As always, thank you, Dan. Appreciate it.
You bet.